Welcome back to Second Chance, a series where I take an extended look back at games that didn't originally click with me during my first hour with them. This month, I'm revisiting Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. During my initial time with it, I was impressed with the variety of weapons and apparel available, yet disappointed that due to the frequency of them, they ended up feeling disposable. Additionally, the lack of branching paths in what was presented as an exploration game made it feel very linear and frankly boring. I ended my time with an impression that Bloodstained had so many ideas bouncing around that it didn't take the time to develop them into anything particularly satisfying, but that further in, perhaps those ideas may meld together better. So I'd like to explore whether or not they did. Now, for those who don't know, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is a spiritual successor to the Castlevania games, created by some of the series' veterans. Castlevania dates all the way back to the original NES, and is responsible for making up the back half of the shorthand title for one of my favorite gaming genres, the Metroidvania. Metroidvanias take a variety of forms, but are known for their branching pathways and emphasis on exploration. So I understand the full irony of what it means when I say this, but despite Metroidvanias being an absolute favorite of mine, I've never actually played a Castlevania game, or at least not for maybe more than an hour or so. I'm sure everybody has at least one game or series that they've just missed out on playing for one reason or another, and Castlevania just happens to be one of those series for me. Because Bloodstained is a love letter to all things Castlevania, I have no doubt that my lack of familiarity has hurt this game's potential to really click with me. Sure, there are homages that I do recognize, such as an abundance of background objects that can be interacted with, but I can't say for certain what aspects are original and which ones are tributes. One thing that I'm fairly confident is unique to this game though, is the enemy list, and it's gigantic. Every room, or at most every couple of rooms, there's a new enemy type to encounter. The variety in enemies helps make the game feel bigger in scope than what the relatively simple map would suggest. Additionally, each one presents an opportunity for variety of gameplay, because each enemy has the potential to require different strategies to dispatch. When viewed as a list, they seem never-ending too, which is simply impressive. What's even crazier is that every enemy has a random chance of dropping a unique shard. Shards all grant different abilities or perks, and they're all directly related to the enemy in which they came from in some way. There are several different classifications of shards, but most commonly, it's simply the enemy's weapon that you're then able to use yourself. The shard system is imaginative, yet it's disappointingly let down by the same thing that makes it impressive. Firstly, because shards drop randomly, and there are just so many different ones, none of them are able to be unique enough to be required to progress through the game. On one hand, I'm glad that pathways aren't blocked off by a 2% drop chance of an item, while on the other, the homogeneity of the shards leads to a point where the majority of them don't even feel worthwhile to use. With the time it takes to step into the menu to swap the shards that are equipped, I very quickly started to not even bother doing that, because with how similar they are, if you find even one that you enjoy, there's little to no incentive to even try using others. As I mentioned in my initial impressions, the same can be said for the weapons too. Each one has a different range, attack speed, damage amount, and more, but once I found one that I liked, it worked well enough for me that there was no reason to change. The excess in variety would seemingly hint towards a deeper combat system, yet none of the enemies that I encountered required much more than attack spamming and some light dodging, so swapping between weapons isn't important at all. To me, this overabundance of content that is not particularly useful represents a priority in development for the wrong things. Inherently, the fact that there are a plethora of weapons and shards means that none of them are able to feel particularly unique or powerful. Yet, the opportunity the developers had to really modify and change the experience in a meaningful way was squandered, because the unique power-ups that could have been used to achieve that are extremely few and far between. The other missed opportunity here is that when key items are granted and new abilities can be used, the level design rarely takes these changes in player capability into account. Take for example this room. The entrance is on the left, and players must jump up these platforms before jumping across a couple of chandeliers to reach the exit. In the lower right, there's a save room, which can be used to refill health and mana. The utility of the save room makes it a frequent hotspot, so the flow to the navigation when leaving this room is worth looking at. Because this platform is placed too high, players must cross the room and complete the platforming challenge the same way that it was initially completed. When I returned to the room much later in the game with a double jump, I was actually excited because I knew that with the extra height to my jump, I would have a shortcut through the room and wouldn't have to yet again do the same platforming challenge I'd already been asked to do many times. That excitement was misplaced, however, because the platform was actually placed just a few inches too high. I have a couple ideas on why that could be, but I think the most likely is that the game just needed more polish. When people think of polish on video games, the thing that most frequently comes to mind is in terms of fixing visuals or eliminating glitches. But in reality, it's a refinement and a second or even third look over all the systems in a game to see if and how they can be improved. Smoothing out the rough edges of a game like this is really what can take it from being an okay game to making it great. If the developers had taken a specific pass on the design of the rooms from the point of view of players not having the double jump, and then again, once they did have it, they would have been able to make some small, almost invisible changes that would have added additional route options once players were more equipped. That one step would have improved movement and flow throughout the entire game, which would have had the knock-on effect of making players feel even better and more powerful when they did receive one of the few power-ups in the game. Level design wasn't the only part that could have used additional polish though. There are issues with hit detection, where the parts of enemies that could hurt you are unclear, due to them coming in and out of the background. On the flip side, the locations where you can hurt them don't always match their character models either, which can make some battles trivial. There were even several times where I just clipped through the floor entirely. The most egregious example of this led to me nearly completely skipping a boss fight too. And lastly, there was a moment where I managed to get a rare shard to drop, but I accidentally stepped through a screen transition too quickly and it wasn't added to my inventory. A little bit of polish could have refined these sections a ton, and it would have made for a less frustrating and more enjoyable experience overall for players. I understand that this game was made by a relatively small team, and that even after having an extremely successful Kickstarter campaign, they likely just didn't have the money to spend to take the time and re-examine all of the little details in the game. And I'd be happy to give the game a full pass on all of this too, since none of it is really game-breaking, but to have an item progression-based game with few items that actually meaningfully affect the parts of the world that you're able to explore, it makes for boring navigation, and calls attention to the other shortcomings more. Put another way, my first hour impressions largely went unchanged and unchallenged. With so many unique collectibles here, they all just start to feel like filler. And with only a strong aesthetic and nostalgia to fall back on, if those things don't already appeal to you, there's nothing really here that'll change any minds. I had hoped that further into the game, the overwhelming number of ideas would find a way to blend and really combine into something special. But for me, that regrettably just didn't happen. Perhaps even further in, that may still be possible, but there are just way too many games and way too little time for me to want to stick with this one any longer to find out. Thanks once more to my patrons, and thank you all for watching.